One, I don't know who any of you are, but happy Sabbath anyway. I didn't know quite what to expect when coming up here. I thought maybe everybody was, not everybody, but some are still wearing the masks. That maybe it would be something like it'd be a new experience, kind of like speaking to a convention of old Western outlaws. All I could see is your beady little eyes. Anyway, if you like a title for this message, it's called The Safe Servant. The Safe Servant. I'm going to get a crook in my neck looking at you guys over there. Turn with you, if you would, to begin to Matthew 25, and we'll read verse 26. Probably a very familiar scripture for most of us. I'm going to carve this out of this particular part here. Matthew 25, verse 26, Christ here speaking, and he said, "But his Lord answered, and he said to him, 'You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed.'" Like I said, I think most of us are very familiar with this parable from which we have just read is, of course, the parable of the talents. And that was the nobleman's response to his servants returning his one talent to him. So then my question for us today is this: why does the nobleman, why does Jesus Christ call this servant a wicked and lazy servant? Well, to begin to find that answer to that question, let's briefly summarize what got us to this point. We all know that nobleman was going away in the parable, and he calls his servants to him, and he distributes his goods to them according to their ability. And he then leaves, and he's gone for a long time. So let's pause for a moment and think about what we have here so far. I know we haven't covered much, but there's a lot there to think about. These servants are his servants, and he is entrusting to them what belongs to him while he's gone. He's also not just blindly setting equal amounts in front of each of them. They are his servants, and he knows them very well. Well enough, in fact, that he recognizes that they do indeed have differing strengths, differing abilities. And he gives to each of them a different number to work with. To one he gives 5, to another 2, and to a third 1. And then he leaves. Now, immediately upon his departure, all three servants act. The 2 who received the 5 and 2 talents respectively, they put those talents to work. They immediately go to work with them. The servant who received the 1 talent, well, he acts immediately too. He takes it and he buries it in the ground for safekeeping. And so after a long time, the nobleman returns. And he calls his servants together to settle accounts, see how they've done. You notice verse 20, if you would. And so he who had received 5 talents came, and he brought 5 other talents, saying, "Lord, you have delivered me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more besides them." Both the servant who received the 5 talents and the servant who received the 2 talents essentially accomplished the same thing. I mean, they doubled what they had been given, and as a result, they both were rewarded with greater responsibility and ushered into, as it says, the joy of their Lord, or God's kingdom. And you can see here that God is looking for quality, not quantity. But let's notice a few other things here too. First, isn't it interesting that all the servants knew exactly how many talents or how much of their Lord's goods had been given to them? They took account of what they had been given. So just like these servants, especially the first 2, we should also strive to recognize in a right way the talents and gifts, the abilities, the strengths that God has blessed us with, and to put them into use in a way which benefits him. Now, what about the third servant? Drop down, if you would, to verse 24, and we'll read 24 and 25. Of course, in the right chapter. "Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, 'Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, scattering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours.'" Like the first two servants, this servant knew exactly what he had been given. And like the other two, this servant had continued in his master's household until his return. They were all doing the initial jobs that they had been given to do. They were servants in their master's household. The difference being that the first two went above and beyond with the additional amounts that they had been given, and they took them and they put them to work and they grew them. Whereas the third servant, he just did his job. So why? Well, it says here because, as we've just read, he was afraid. He knew that his master would expect more. He knew that he would be reaping where nothing had been sown, that he would be gathering where nothing had been scattered. He knew that going in, what the expectations were. They all knew that. Yet the third servant seems to think that returning what was given in good working order would somehow be enough. Be enough to get him where he wanted to go. Because he was afraid, because he feared the expectations that were there when he took the job. Because he thought just doing the job would be enough. Matthew Henry's commentary had some insightful thoughts on this servant and his minimums. Matthew Henry says, the servant thought that his account would pass well enough because he could say, there, you have what is yours. That doesn't sound very respectful, though, does it? He says, Lord, I was no spendthrift of my estate, no prodigal of my time, no profaner of my Sabbaths, no opposer of good ministers and good preaching. Lord, I never ridiculed my Bible, nor set my wits to work to banter religion, nor abused my power to persecute any good man. I never drowned my parts, nor wasted God's good creatures in drunkenness, gluttony. Nor ever to my knowledge did I do any injury to anybody. Matthew Henry continues, he said, many that are called Christians build great hopes for heaven, God's kingdom, upon their being able to make such an account. Yet all this amounts to no more than, there you have what is yours. As if no more were required or could be expected. And therein lies the answer. Because that was not true. Because this man was afraid, and guess what? Fear lied to him. And as we find out, fear is also a killer. Because therein, what we just read, lies the answer to our question as to why he is called a wicked and lazy servant. Wicked because he is doing just the minimum when he knows more is expected. Lazy because he does nothing about it. Has a very Laodicean feel to it, doesn't it? As we draw this to a close, we can see clearly why Christ called the third servant a wicked and lazy servant. But would we be able to see that if we were one of the other servants? Like the 5 foolish virgins or the wedding guests without wedding clothes, this servant seems to make it to the return of Christ and then is found wanting. This is no place that any of us want to be. We cannot be a people of minimums. We can't be safe, not take risks, and I mean in growing and learning and overcoming. We must take what God has entrusted to us and grow it. Because we know God, we know. When we took the job, we know God expects to gather where he has not scattered and to reap where he has not sown. That is called overcoming. That's called trials. That's called persecution. It's also called a crown of glory if we endure until the end. Don't be that safe servant. And just as kind of something, because I couldn't really work this in the message, I wanted to just say something about the 5 and the 2 and the 1, since it seems odd So I think some people sometimes think that, oh, because they had lots of abilities, that naturally they were going to be an in. And this could be just as easily said if the 5 and the 1 were switched. I'm sure more than one of us can think of people out there along the years who've had a lot of ability and a lot of blessings who have not done the job. Don't be the safe servant.